All right, so this is the SIG Auth meeting for March 6, 2019. Seems like it's been a very, very long time since we had one. It seems like a pretty reasonable agenda, and I think Jordan had some desire for making our meetings a little more structured. But we can start with announcements. So Jordan, did you want to talk about the extension beta removal?
Sure. This is mostly just a heads up that we're finally getting traction on closing out the extensions v1 beta 1 API group. If you follow that issue, the original title of that was "This API group should be gone by the end of 2017." So end of 2019, right on schedule. That impacts SIG Auth for the pod security policy API, which is still sort of in process, and we're still trying to figure out what to do with it, but it has found a home in the policy API group, and whatever happens with it will happen there. And so this is just a heads up that we actually have a green set of CI tests running with the extensions v1 beta 1 group turned off. And the plan is to announce in 1.14 that it's going away in 1.16, and then keep that job green for the next 2 releases to make sure that we're not picking up any new dependencies on those APIs. So if you're, and this goes for all APIs in that group, if you're doing deployments or daemon sets or anything, use the apps v1 APIs. If you're using pod security policies, use the policy version. Anyway, that's what that is.
I was going to ask you a question related to that, Jordan. Are we going to honor the use check for the old group forever?
Use check forever.
Like today from RBAC, we allow you to say that like you can use PSP foo in either group, and that's good enough.
Yeah. We will probably, at the same time we announce deprecation in 1.14, announce also deprecation of the old policy check. So that would give at least 2 releases, possibly 4. I need to look at where it would fall in the policy, but yeah, eventually we'll collapse just onto checking permissions in the policy API group. That was it.
Cool. I didn't know Bug Creek was tomorrow, but I'm glad to know now that it is tomorrow. Do we have anything outstanding that we need to do between now and tomorrow?
There are a couple audit pulls. There's a test pull for run as group. If you go look at pull requests in the 1.14 milestone tagged with SIG Auth, there are a few. So yeah, we're trying to get those looked at and cleaned up today and tomorrow.
Okay. Greg, I think you added something to announce.
Oh, that was me. I moved this from discussion to announcements. Unfortunately, Yisui couldn't make it today, but he sent out an email to the SIG Auth mailing list about adding a sub-project or a repository for the working group multi-tenancy, which I believe is a sub-working group of SIG Auth. So essentially, he was just asking for some SIG Auth sign-off. It seems reasonable to have a little repo to start to prototype some of their work. So I'm pro this, adopting this repo or sponsoring this repo. If anybody has thoughts on that, feel free to respond to the email thread or the linked bug that makes the request for the issue. Otherwise, yeah, I guess we'll probably get a repo up and running for them within a week or 2. yeah, there's a full proposal on what will be covered by that repo in the linked email thread. And yeah, it should be pretty covered. And if maybe we can invite Yisui back to discuss in more detail when he doesn't have a conflict.
Cool. I have no disagreement. Sounds cool. All right. Rob, were you ready to do your demo?
Yeah, can I share my screen?
Yeah, let me stop sharing. I should let you do so.
Cool. Let me try. Can you see this? Cool. All right, so I just want to take a few minutes and demo our BackLookup and our Back Manager. There are a couple projects, open source projects we were working on at ReactiveOps. At ReactiveOps, we get to work with a lot of different organizations and see how they're using RBAC and authorization in Kubernetes. And we saw a lot of really consistent challenges with it. So we came up with our BackLookup and our Back Manager as tools to try and help. I don't know if they do, but that's why I'm here trying to get some feedback. So first off, our BackLookup, and the idea behind this is just a really simple CLI that I think of as a reverse lookup for RBAC. So like the reverse phone number lookup way back in the day, that's my idea here. And to have great auth, you need to actually understand it and be able to see what's going on. And the idea with our BackLookup is you just enter a name, and it shows you any kind of subjects, any RBAC subjects that have access, have any kind of role binding or cluster role binding in your cluster. And of course, if you do a broader query like example, you're going to get any subject that matches that. In this case, they're all emails, so anything matching that email is going to come back with a result here. You see what role they have and what namespace, or if it's cluster-wide, that level of access. And then finally, like any good Kubernetes CLI, you can get wide output. So you can see exactly the cluster role binding or role binding this auth is being granted by. And then on the far left, the other addition is that you can see the type of subject, whether it's user, service account, or group. And that was great for a 0.1 release. But at some point, somebody filed an issue that like they were querying all this stuff, and GKE, they still had access in GKE because IAM matters there too. So now there's this GKE flag that shows you related IAM to that user. So you can see Joe at example.com has this IAM role for it. And similarly, you can get wide output. So IAM role, container viewer, specific to that IAM access. So that's like the very, very brief intro to our BackLookup. It's a really simple tool. Any questions about it?
Is scope there generally namespace, aside from when it's project-wide or what have you?
Yeah. So the scope is always namespace, and so you would run into a weird use case of if you ever name a namespace cluster-wide, then you're going to get into an issue there. But
I name all my namespaces cluster-wide.
Never know.
And so the GKE checks are doing like Google Cloud specific API calls and stitching them together on the glass. Okay.
Yeah, it is not the prettiest code behind that. I apologize, but it does work. So,
what API are those checks actually calling?
The RBAC ones or the IAM ones?
The IAM ones.
It's project-wide. I want to say it's get IAM policy. I can't remember offhand.
Okay. So I know we've seen confusion, both kind of what you said, that in cluster operations inherit those IAM permissions. There's also the possible further confusion that you might have permissions upwards in your GCP org hierarchy.
Yep, you're right. And the other thing this doesn't cover is if that member happens to be part of a group in GCP IAM, and that, so it's a partial solution, but
either way, it's really cool to see.
Yeah,
cool.
I was going to say, did you consider, instead of using cluster-wide, like a star symbol.
Yeah, that I actually did that in another CLI tool I built, but I don't know why I didn't do that here. That would have made sense.
Yeah. Or anything that's not a valid namespace.
Yes. Well, so I think part of the confusion is like I have project wide, which in GCP with like for IAM because technically it's beyond clusters, but I really could just use star for both and it would make sense. So yeah, good idea. All right, I'll keep on moving. RBAC Manager is a bit more involved here because it's an operator. It simplifies RBAC management, and I think the parallel use case that we were thinking of when we were developing this is pods and deployments. So as a really simple example here, pods can be deployed on their own, but they're a bit of a pain to work with at any kind of scale. As you know, you can't really change most attributes without just replacing the pod entirely. So income deployments and any other parent resource which own pods, and they add several levels of helpful functionality like rolling updates for you. So with that background, we tried to do a similar thing with role bindings. So our custom resource in this with RBAC Manager is called RBAC definition. And role bindings can be deployed on their own, but as you start to scale them out and you start to have a lot of them for different users and different namespaces, they become a bit of a pain to work with at scale. And you can't really change most attributes. Like if you're trying to change a role reference as an example, you can't really change those on existing role bindings. You have to replace the role bindings. So RBAC definitions in this world own role bindings and add several levels of helpful functionality on top of them. So the schema that we came up with looks like this. This is what an RBAC definition looks like, minus the metadata and API version. It's a list of RBAC bindings, and each RBAC binding can have a list of subjects, cluster role bindings, and role bindings. And those role bindings have a namespace and cluster role or role, and the cluster role bindings just have a cluster role. So in this simple example, we have Jane, who has cluster admin access, and Joe, who has edit access and web and view access and API. So very, very simple example, but if we go ahead and apply this, RBAC Manager is going to create everything for us, which is not that exciting because we can do that already with role bindings and everything just works. This is a bit more concise, but that's about all we've gotten so far. The real reason this starts to become helpful is if you're trying to automate this with something like CI. If you're trying to build this into a CI pipeline, that's really difficult without some kind of parent resource like this. So in this case, let's say that Joe now wants edit access instead of view access in the API namespace. We just make that single change and we apply it, and RBAC Manager goes ahead and makes the change for us by deleting and creating a new role binding. And then finally, simple deletions. If you just want to remove that access entirely, remember that an RBAC definition effectively owns role bindings. So it knows what it should have, and then anytime an RBAC definition update comes through, it compares the current state with the desired state and makes the changes. So we remove that role binding and just apply the RBAC definition, and RBAC Manager goes ahead and deletes that extra role binding that's no longer desired. And then the last feature that I want to cover here is label selectors. This is kind of a new thing that we added pretty recently, and that's something that came out of the desire for ephemeral namespaces. We have a lot of customers, a lot of organizations that we're working with that want to just spin up an ephemeral namespace and give a group, a team, access to it. So any feature branch, as an example, has an ephemeral namespace associated with it. With label selectors, you can just say any namespace matching this selector gets this level of access, while these users get access to it. So in this case, we've got a namespace selector for a specific label team equals web. We created demo namespace. We label it with that. You can see the role bindings created. We change that label. You can see the role bindings deleted. Really, really simple functionality, but it has been helpful for that kind of ephemeral use case and probably others that I'm not quite aware of yet. So that's all there is with RBAC Manager. Any questions, any feedback?
That looks really cool. Things like this are exactly the type of thing that I like to see getting kind of built using the RBAC stuff as primitives. So that's very cool. I'm curious how you go about coexisting with other things using the same primitives just under the covers? How does RBAC Manager know which things it owns?
Oh, right. So owner references. That's it. It doesn't touch anything that it doesn't own.
I see.
Yeah. So an RBAC definition is set as the owner for any role binding or cluster role binding.
Do you ever use aggregated roles?
No.
I couldn't tell if you were granting view by adding an aggregated.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was using the default. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the simplest example here, but yeah, it could be any. This is not for managing roles. This is just for managing role bindings. And since most people have clusters that have those roles, that's, whatever.
Yeah, the managing bindings across namespaces dynamically via labels is a thing that I get asked about a lot. So that's cool to see it in action.
Cool. All right, well, I think that's all for me. If I can manage to get myself out of this screen share. Yeah, cool.
One more question.
Yeah.
What are the pain points that you hit that you wish Kubernetes supported while developing these cool tools?
Yeah, so I actually had a whole list of things, but I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. One of the things I would say was just the frustration around everything else in Kubernetes is really easy to automate. As an example, everything's really easy to just plug into a CI pipeline and just let go. And RBAC just doesn't fit those models because you just can't apply and update a role binding as an example, or especially for revocation. If you want to revoke access, you can't just remove a file from a really simple CI pipeline and just see it go away. Like that was one of the things that I found confusing. And the other thing and that's not really specific to RBAC, that's just some challenges if you're trying to automate that. And then the other thing that I think is relevant here was just what we've seen over and over again is how do I have, what access do I have in this cluster, or what access does X user have in this cluster? So we tried to solve those, but I would say impartial solutions that could use improvement. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to ask you, Rob, on the cleanup logic, is it tolerant of your controller being down for some period of time and then coming back up?
Yeah, absolutely. It is doing just it's actually doing a controller runtime sync basically. So it's looking at RBAC definitions consistently, and it doesn't depend on an update event specifically.
I had a quick question about the label selector on namespace concept. I know we've had issues thinking through the ACL model around using labels inside of RBAC. The only using them on namespaces makes it a little nicer because you assume that namespace administrative control could get you access to this namespace anyway. I think the one thing still open is if you're able to modify one of these RBAC definitions, you can maybe claim a label on a namespace that maybe you didn't want to be meaningful.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if you've run into that at all.
Basically, this model does not scale with letting people grant access at a namespace level that don't have cluster admin. RBAC Manager requires cluster admin. RBAC definitions are custom resources and by default are generally granted as cluster admin. So it doesn't scale really well if you're I mean, if you have an access to modify RBAC definitions, you might as well have cluster admin. That's what it comes down to.
That makes sense. I think that addresses most of the criticisms that Jordan has had to provide to fight off the constant naive requests for label-based RBAC in the past.
I was going to ask you, Rob, Did you ever have like any performance issues on like a larger cluster?
I think it's been great. Label selectors are the newest version, the newest iteration, and those are definitely a concern for performance. I have not tested on what I would call massive clusters, so I can't say for sure. But within a reasonable scale, they've been working fine. So I know that's not a complete answer there, but yeah.
Cool. I don't think we have any other demos. Okay, I think next item is some E2E flicks. Audit.
Yeah, I put that on there. There's been a kind of persistent flake that we've been chasing about how we do audit testing. Right now we have actually quite a few E2E tests that are only running in GCE E2E environments and are like scraping master audit logs in order to scan for audit events that are triggered by the E2E test. And when some rotation changes were made to make the logs rotate more frequently because they were filling up, that made these tests go crazy. And just in general, I think this is a kind of strange way to test this. This seems more like something that should be an integration test. And so I wasn't actually sure why these were E2E tests, and if this was like efforts to get coverage for conformance or something like that. But we backed out the log rotation change to unflake the tests a little bit. But if you're looking for a place to jump in and you're interested and have time, this might be something to help with. I know Patrick has been looking at it, but just wanted to ask if anyone knew why these were E2E tests and not integration tests.
Cool. Thanks for that, Dave. All right, so we have some polls of note. Audit metadata. Saw that PR go by. Does anyone want to give a TLDR?
It didn't work, and now it does.
I think that's all PRs, though, Jordan.
What?
I think that's all PRs in a single TLDR.
No. Some things are new features. It didn't exist, and now it does. There we go. Now I've covered all possibilities. Custom resources weren't providing correct metadata because they weren't getting encoded properly in audit events. So you, dependent on that, you might have noticed that was broken. The controller manager using rotatable tokens. Mike, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah. This is migrating the controller manager to using token request APIs instead of what it did before, which is to create a service account per control loop essentially and pull the secret out that it generates from the token controller. So this is work along the path to phase in token request as the replacement for tokens generated in service account secrets. This will be enabled as currently written in the PR. This will be enabled when token request APIs are detected to be enabled on the API server. And we currently have those APIs enabled on the generally on all end-to-end tests. I think there was an open question about whether end-to-end tests are long enough to exercise the refresh code paths when tokens expire. Right now, the expiration is, or the TTL of these tokens are an hour in the current PR. So it's a step in the right direction. It's unfortunately a little late in the 114 cycle, but that wasn't really due to the PR author, it was mostly due to the reviewers being slow. But that's the general overview of the current state of the PR. So, Jordan, do you feel like this is something that we should try to get into 114?
If we can exercise the rotation path well, then I think it's fine to go ahead and bring in. The comment about making it robust to service account deletion. If you look at the existing way we build clients for controllers, they're actually really vulnerable to disruption if like the token that they created at initialization time gets deleted. That controller just spins with 401 errors until you shut the process down.
I would point out, Jordan, I consider that a feature because whenever I wanted to disable controllers in the cluster, I would go delete all of their secrets.
You broke somebody's workflow.
Well, now you'll have an hour before it's going to come back to life again.
Unless we're smart about it and refresh on 401.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I think this is an incremental step in the right direction. It makes the controller manager more robust than it was. It gives us a way to tie in things like responding to revocations more quickly in the future. If we exercise the rotation path well, then I think it's fine to get in. So I don't know if that means shortening it from an hour to half an hour, just so we know we hit it a couple times in an EDE run, or overriding it in EDE environments. But if we work through that today, I think we can probably get those in.
I would hate to add a permanent flag to override it, but
yeah,
at least in the early phase, I think it would be nice to be able to turn it off in an emergency, and also to reduce the TTLs in tests.
Yeah. All right. Let's think through those things today and see if we can figure out a path
Sounds
forward.
good.
And then was this you as well, Mike?
Yeah. Charles wanted to discuss this, and Micah is here. I don't know if Micah, do you want to? Wait, which one is this actually?
This is providing way to see for discovery.
Oh, this is a different one than I was thinking of.
Or were you thinking of something else?
Oh, I was sorry. For some reason, I had it in my mind that we were going to talk about the out of process signing, but I am a terrible reader apparently. Okay, Charles, what did you want to discuss about this?
So I just wanted to close to see if there was some way to close this out one way or another. So there was a lot of discussion on this proposal as to basically whether it would be better to provide a not necessarily valid OIDC discovery document at the OIDC endpoint. I had suggested an alternative, which was to have a similar but not entirely valid thing at a different path. It seems like there's not closure on this. So I guess my question is what is the path that we should do to get closure on how to do that? I have a private, a private branch at the moment that implements one of these. And I'm happy to contribute that back based on whatever the outcome here is. But I kind of want, the proposal to be solid before doing that.
So the Jukes URI at this point seems fairly non-controversial. So we can start getting that stuff in. I think there's the open question of how to discover the issuer identifier.
Did we settle whether we could actually make a technically valid discovery doc that had a custom grant type? Or were there things that we actually couldn't fill in and make it valid?
The authorization endpoint is doesn't make sense.
Right.
And it's required. So we could point it at unimplemented as a service, if that exists.
Seems like such a terrible hack. I outlined basically every place in this where I was like, but we're not actually doing anything that is like.
I mean,
other than the fact that we have the token.
At the same time, this is sort of like, I feel like this is something that's missing from the flow, right? If I don't want to publish how I get this token, or the way that I get this token isn't this, but it's otherwise compatible, right? There's not a way to publish just the validation bits.
Right, but I would expect if I hit a server that had an OpenID configuration, that I could get a token using an OIDC flow. Right, like that's what's there for.
If you were authorized to, but
there are two reasons for it.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a token and you want to validate it. That's a significant use case. You don't have a token and you want to get one. That's also a significant use case. They are distinct. If we could be crisp about the fields that are required and come up with like a concrete list of here's what it would take to publish something that wouldn't cause a random spec compliant verifier to crash because we were missing a field that, a field was null when it should be not null. Figuring out how weird it would have to be valid, that would be what I would want to do first. I don't think publishing a thing at a different URL is going to get us all the benefits we wanted from this.
That's totally fair.
So this has been tested against a couple OIDC validators or clients, and it seems to work fairly well against the ones that I spot checked. I think if we have the authorization endpoint be an actual URL that like returns a 403 or a 404, most clients are never gonna actually query that. There's not a good reason. And I think that if we move the programmatic authorization grant type make that a grant type, I think we're spec compliant, because there's nothing in the spec that says that you have to use a defined grant type or a standardized grant type.
And the intent, at least for the foreseeable future, is that we're using this to populate verifiers. We're not using this to trigger request flows.
Correct.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay. Let's write that up. Actually, describe what we're doing, and maybe not in a. I guess this needs to move over to enhancements or something, but yeah, kind of take the discussion from the comments back into the actual proposal, and get comments on that. And it's a little weird, but it has a lot of benefits. So I'm gonna try that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mike, was there something else you wanted to discuss? A different PR or?
Yeah, at some point I would like to cover the out of process signing for that proposal and KEP. I don't know if we've covered it in this meeting yet, or maybe I just missed it.
It got mentioned, but we didn't really talk through it. I would like to take some time to talk about kind of plans for the meeting. I think that could benefit us more broadly, and then maybe circle back to that topic.
Sounds good. And we can also throw it on the schedule for a following meeting.
Yeah. So to give credit where credit was due, the idea for kind of revisiting how we structure our meetings was Mike's, not mine. So it's a good question what we want to actually use these meetings for. And we thought it would be good to take a step back and maybe look at some things that haven't been as structured or haven't gotten the attention they need over the past few months or few releases. And so two pretty good examples are like milestone planning and backlog triage, whether that's issues or pull requests. So the first, like milestone planning, is kind of looking ahead and saying, for the next release or the next month or whatever, the next time period, like what are our priorities? What are people working on? Do these things align? Are we competing for the same resources, reviewer resources or design resources, or like kind of aligning efforts to actually make progress instead of having 20 things in progress and not progressing. And so there was a link to the way Cluster Lifecycle has been doing this, and it had some good thoughts there. I don't know if people had a chance to read that. But we're coming up on the end of 114. Code freezes tomorrow, probably a week of people putting effort into stabilizing stuff and flushing stuff out, and then we'll be thinking about plans for the next release. And so I think it would make sense to probably devote our next meeting to 115 planning. And in the past, what planning has looked like is like people put stuff in a list and maybe work on it and then maybe not. It seems like we can do better than that. But what I'd like to see is the people who are working in particular subprojects actually identifying priorities for those subprojects and kind of mapping those to the release. And so for the next meeting, I think it would be good to kind of go through all of the subprojects that we have and say what, like, stack rank work in progress, stack rank priorities, and say like what's top priority, who's working on it, and how much are they working on it. Are we trying to finish something? Are we trying to like get the next step done? And we should be realistic about this. Like we always think we can do more than we can. But just for our own sanity and for the rest of the community, kind of understanding like what's coming, when can I expect these things to make progress? Between now and the next meeting, I think it'd be good to list out our subprojects, stack rank stuff in progress, and what it is planned to be worked on in 115. And then we can kind of take a look at the big picture at the next meeting and say, does this seem reasonable? Are these things competing for resources? Before we go on to like the backlog triage stuff, do people have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a good outcome would be to clearly define the exit criteria of all the features that are ongoing and make sure that we're making progress and things aren't just languishing. That's both like features that have feature flags, APIs that are stuck in beta. Having an idea of how to make progress on those and figure out how to unblock people from making progress, like through being paying attention to reviews, making sure that reviewers and approvers are accurate. I think that those would all be good results of a rethinking of this.
One thing that I've tried to do in features and things that I work on is have a timeline for that through completion. So if you go look at the, let's see if I can find this. I'll throw the link in afterwards. But the node labeling feature had like a multi-release rollout where we did some things last release, and then we're doing some cleanup this release, and then we have to wait 2 releases, and then we can tighten some more things down at the kubelet, and then we can tighten some more things down in the API server. having all of that actually laid out and thought through when we propose the feature gives us like really concrete timelines. Like, oh, in 114 we can do this, in 116 we can do this, in 117 we can do this. And so having that level of detail would be helpful just in general, like, because a lot of the things we do have compatibility implications. And so it's not just a matter of finding the time to do the work, it's a matter of finding the time to do the work and then wait 6 months before you like merge the pull request. And so knowing where those wait 6 month chunks fall in the work can help us prioritize things like, oh, this really needs to happen in 114 so that we don't block ourselves 6 months down the road. So if you have things in progress, and this is part of what the release team has been asking us to do with KEPs, to get like roadmaps and graduation criteria and test plans and like actually be more disciplined in how we plan out work for a feature instead of just, it works well enough, it's beta, I can use it, I'm happy, I'm just gonna let it sit in beta forever. So if you have your name on an enhancement or a feature gate or an API or a KEP, this is a call to action for you to add those things if they're missing, and if they're already there, to keep an eye on them and actually map them to work to make those timelines get executed. The other thing that is just a useful thing to do in general is triaging issues and pull requests that come in. And so GitHub makes it really easy to look for things labeled with SIG Auth that have been opened since the last meeting. And so a useful practice, I think, could be to pretty quickly sweep through things that got opened that are languishing. We have sort of insane numbers of feature request issues open with no priority assigned. Some of them very, very old. So I put a few example queries in the meeting minutes. The first couple are the types of things I think would be useful to sweep through in meetings. Just here are the issues open since the last meeting. Are there any that are urgent or don't have owners or don't have priority? And so like starting to get a handle on the things coming in would be a good first step. And then we can start burning down the large backlog. So I think a good outcome of this would be that things get priority assigned or get closed. So things that are asking for features, I think we have 4 levels of priority, like awaiting evidence, backlog, important long-term, important soon, and critical. So we have 5 priorities. We should be able to put a ballpark priority on things as our first pass or close them. And so again, I would ask the sub-project owners to kind of look at some of these queries and look for things related to your sub-project and start assigning priority or closing with explanations or with dialogue. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of bugs. Auth is not an area where you really want to see lots of bugs, so that makes me happy. There are a couple, but yeah. So that's the kind of 3-pronged approach I'd like to see. Better planning for forward-looking things, and then better grooming of all the open issues we have, so that and that will inform our planning, right? When we go to do our planning, if we have 90 feature request issues without priority, it's like, I don't know what we even should work on next, assuming we had a moment to work on something new. But if we've actually taken the time to kind of bucket things, we're like, all right, well, this is critical, this is important soon. like we're gonna pull from the top of the list. So I've talked a lot. Other people, thoughts, other things that you think we should do regularly that we're not doing, or suggestions about how to kind of do some of those things more practically.
Do these things manifest as standing items, or maybe monthly items or quarterly items as far as this meeting is concerned?
The planning seems like a release cadence type of thing. So like the week after freeze seems like a good time to start planning the next release. Mm-hmm. Ideally, this triage would be happening throughout the week. It would be great if an issue didn't sit for 2 weeks before someone looked at it. I think our meeting here is probably a good chance to make sure things don't escape the 2-week window. And so anything that hasn't yet been triaged or assigned or assigned priority would show up here. And it's like a forcing function to, yeah. So I would like the issues with no priority query to be empty when we get to this meeting because they've already been looked at and assigned priorities.
So Jordan or Mike, maybe, or anyone, I'm curious, how do other teams sort of track this kind of stuff over time? Like I could see like a Trello board or something with like swim lanes for things and like try to move them across, right? Like I don't see how like a Google Doc being like a good like visualizer for what folks are working on and like where they stand, but maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, people are starting to use GitHub projects. That works well for like a small number of things. So probably maybe at the sub-project level, like here's the stuff happening with audit, and you've got like different stuff in progress and different efforts. It's been pretty ad hoc, but GitHub projects kind of at that smaller, more granular level I've seen those work well. We're using it for API review stuff. I think some people are using that for custom resource stuff. They're using it for workloads. Yeah, the queries here were more just here are the things we looked at in the meeting. They're not intended to be like a status tracking thing. GitHub makes it pretty low friction, and they're making the project boards better. So you can really easily query stuff. And if we've learned one thing in this project, it's that if you have information represented in 2 places, at least one of those places will be out of date. Possibly both of those places will be out of date, but at least one of them will be. And so whatever we can do to avoid denormalizing issue data and PR data and stuff would be good.
So I'm unfamiliar with the GitHub project stuff, but like, is it capable of saying that like something with this label plus these other labels is like targeted for some release or something?
It's like Trello that auto syncs issues and PRs. So it not auto syncs, but like surfaces all the information from them. So you can filter it the same way you filter issues and PRs. You can query things and drag them into the project pretty easily. Yeah, but all the query stuff would just be normal GitHub queries. So yeah, so again, this is if you are involved in the subprojects between now and the next meeting, think about what that project is doing for 115 and try to burn through feature requests or bugs. There aren't really that many bugs. There's like 2 bugs, but feature requests related to that. And at the very least, assign priority. If there are things that are clearly out of scope, then enclose them with explanations. But yeah, that would be really helpful for getting a handle on 115. Oh, and what Mike said about like mapping out things that are blocking, things that are in progress. So just capture current state, help us understand where we're at with things that are in progress. And where you do that is probably up to you. Some things that are in progress already have KEPs. I've found it helpful to kind of keep those updated with timelines so that when people are looking at a particular feature, they don't have to go hunting for other documents to say, what's the state of this, or what's the roadmap for this? And so like I'll use my node label example. I have a pull request open to update the timeline for that, for some cleanup things that we found that pushed out some of the stuff one release. And so KEPs are a good place to kind of put details about graduation criteria, and then as you get further into implementation, keep that updated. Like as things become clearer and you find out more information, fold that back into the document, just keep it updated. So there's kind of one place people can look to see, does this feature exist? Is work happening on it? What's the plan for it? They're not always the best place for collaborating on stuff. So if you want to throw stuff in a doc and then like work through stuff and then pull it back into the KEP, that's fine. But yeah, that's what I've found helpful. And we will send out a summary of these 3 action items to the mailing list and to individual emails and on Slack and by mail. I'm just kidding.
I'm open to experimenting and figuring out what works. So if anybody else has other things that we could do to make us more efficient as a group, please make a recommendation.
Yeah, I think one suggestion I would make is that if you are mostly an observer and would like to help, pick a subproject and ask how you can help with some of these things. Even just identifying the issues related to that area would be helpful. Like there's a lot of information gathering types of things where it's like sweep these 80 things and like, put a list of the things related to this area here so we can go through them. Yeah.
Does anyone have anything else? We have 3 minutes left of the meeting. All right, I guess we can call it. Give you guys back 3 minutes every day. Thanks everyone for attending. I know we haven't had one in a while. And thanks Jordan for sort of, and Mike for sort of trying to get us more organization in the future. That way we can kind of have a lot of value from these meetings. Thanks for that, guys.